Well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Divya. I would have loved to have met you under other circumstances, but glad we could do this today. Thanks to Manu and Ajay for putting it together. I was going to give like a slightly different talk, I think. Wait, let me minimize this window, sorry. I was going to give a slightly different talk when we were organizing this event a bit ago, but given everything, it seems like I wanted to put focus on some of the work I've been doing and I've seen in context, and also the incredible ways that communities of different kinds have been coming together to create transformative change. So a little bit about me. I grew up in California. I studied symbolic systems at Stanford, spent time generally, like Manu was saying, teaching class and then building digital tools for impact. Sexual assault reporting platform is something I focused on. It's now being adopted in schools across the US. And yeah, teaching classes in the CS and the political science departments. Yes, okay. And what I'm passionate about is this idea of prefigurative change, which is change that comes through organizations and individuals that embody and the values of the world they want to build and the processes of that world. So obviously this is a great sort of abstract idea, but I think it's also a very practical choice, because it gives you clear design and execution principles and frameworks. So you know what to do in your work, which is lucky for me. So basically, you take what it is that you want to see, so a just and equitable, a joyful, sustainable future, and you build that into the organizations you create. So over the past 2 years, I've been traveling through India, meeting with individuals and organizations and collecting stories and lessons on how to create this kind of change. And obviously, it's not all perfect. Compromise is a big part of any change making, any running a business, as all of you very well know, but still, the stories have been magical. So I am not an expert, but I've definitely had the privilege of learning from experts, from women who built a 1,000-strong collective in Kerala, students who've created networks to share stories hidden by mainstream media, villagers that have self-organized into working committees for education, healthcare, women's rights. And I wanted to work with these organizations and learn from them and understand, okay, how do we repeat these successes, learn from these failures, and tell these stories? And I'm also in the process of writing a book, and it's basically my attempt to organize and present what I've learned through this journey. I found that these three big spaces, so work, education, and advocacy, make up a huge part of change making, particularly this collective idea of change making, and each have sort of separate and unique ways in which collectivization and technology can play a role. So let's talk about work. India has, as we probably have all heard, some amazing large-scale cooperative success stories, things like Amul and Seva that have come in, revitalized communities. But I would say this country also has an equally impressive and growing number of smaller, self-organizing, formal and informal cooperatives involving artisans, farmers, and workers of all kinds. Countless studies have shown that these models can help move individuals, families, and communities out of poverty, and not just that, provide the kind of flexibility, ownership, and agency that leads to actual deep level change. So change that you can see in a community across generations, across, for me, like visits over years, things like that, right? And it's not immediate, of course, but one of the organizations I've worked with, it's called Industry, started building cooperatives in India around 10 years ago, and is now seeing how not only the women they work with, but their families are really taking on owning and solving problems in the business, in the cooperative business, but also in their communities at large. Sorry. Let me go back to where I was. All right. Thank you all for holding on, hopefully making fun of me in my absence. Okay. So yes, I was saying these kinds of self-organizing communities present such an incredible opportunity for change. And I think it's the kind of change that lasts over time, which is obviously the kind of change we all want to see, right? Not just providing something to a certain family, individual, or group, but creating sustainable change that comes back, gives back to the community, and makes that process different over time. I've seen this happen with my own eyes across the country, and I would say a really big part of this is identifying and working with in-community leaders. In each of these places, it's about learning from work that's already happening, supporting and growing that work, because there's so much drive and desire and initiative, I would say, in every place I've visited, at least. And only about slightly tapping into that, maybe identifying a leader, working with an organization there's so much transformative change that can happen. And I think these are models, like I was saying earlier, prefigurative models, right, that reflect the world we want to see, that are already functioning in that kind of world. They're socially and economically resilient because of that. And even now, I've been checking in with a lot of the collectives I've worked with, and they've moved so incredibly quickly in dealing with the pandemic and shifting their production quickly into masks, making food for the community, and really prioritizing their workers, prioritizing worker safety, which is something we really don't see from lots of organizations. So I think this stress test has really shown that this model works, and it works for people, which is what we should all be working for. I think for me, the power of education was really highlighted a few years ago when I started spending summers, not just changing my hair color, as you can see, but working in different areas of Palestine, building out programs that teach kids in refugee camps design thinking and computer science. This really taught me how education can be and needs to be a prefigurative space. So no matter what circumstances you come from, what circumstances you learn under, students deserve to have agency and creative control, not only over the classroom space, but what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. And that is a hard thing to do with the kinds of massive material disparities we were working with in Palestine, for example. We had no D school, but I think that kind of education can be brought to anyone. And this really, again, going back to the collective prefigurative model, can create sustainability and change, because the students we work with, they use the knowledge to lift themselves out of their circumstances, and that is what they should do, and that's amazing. But so many of them come back to their communities and make sure that they also work to teach and to lift other people up, their families, their friends, their neighbors, and that's when things really start changing over time, I would say. This kind of work is also, of course, happening in tons of places closer to home, with incredible organizations like Project Potential in Bihar, set up in one of the most backward districts in the state, and is now teaching hundreds of children through this incredible interactive and creative pedagogy, bridging that material gap with just the desire to have these kids learn what they want to learn. Also building a wildly futuristic, sustainable campus out of local materials. Manu can attest. It's absurd to see how quickly a region can be transformed, and people can be transformed through the work of these kinds of prefigurative organizations. And to me, I think the last piece, like I mentioned before, is advocacy. And we talk a lot, when we talk about change, we talk about work, education, health, and things like that. But I think advocacy and access to advocacy specifically, just the ability to work towards and see change in your community is a foundational right and a big piece of change making. And of course, advocacy doesn't just look like protests, although protests are important and they make for great pictures. Most of the process is behind the scenes, knowing when your community isn't being treated well or has an unfulfilled need, and really being able to come together as a group to agree on demands, have those demands heard, and really have the collective power to get that done. And I think this is a piece, and I bring this up because bringing this back to the group, this is a piece where so many of the communities I work with need our help, the help of people with more access and more privilege currently, to lift up their voices, make sure their demands are met, and also make sure long-term those inequities in power don't persist, right? Someday we'd like to make sure that these communities don't need our help to do that, and working on that as well. Communities that are able to advocate for themselves are able to grow and make change. That's a fact. And this requires the work and the education piece. Those are obviously connected, because no one has time to work towards civic change if they don't have access to income and education. So to me, I've seen these three pieces as all crucial and very linked from the ground up. Overall, I would say there is truly an incredible, mind-boggling amount of positive, dynamic, and transformative change, prefigurative change happening in this country and around the world, in all three of these spaces. And I think it is our job to find it, to grow it, and to support it, and in our lives to live it. We all see lots of ways in which the world around us can be made better. Incorporating those things into the organizations we build from the ground up, into the decisions we make, into what we support, really can make the difference, I think. For me, I know I'll never be as much of an expert in each of these communities as the people that live in them, that create them, that fight for them. But it's been an honor working alongside and mostly just learning from these people, you know, those in-community leaders, tireless workers, the real change makers, and work on making sure that their vision gets realized. I wanted to end with this quote. This is from a phone conversation I had with Urangalal, which is an organization in Kerala, one of India's oldest, largest cooperatives, and they operate on a consensus process. All of their workers, thousands of them, get together day by day and discuss problems that they've been facing, how they can deal with them, and things like that. And unanimously, a few weeks ago, the thousands of members decided in the last few weeks, turned all of their resources into helping their communities deal with coronavirus. And I was talking to Kishore, and he said, things don't just get better, but people do make things better, and they always have. And see, like today, we are those people, and that's why we're doing our best. And I think I couldn't have said it better. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Divya. That was incredible. We have questions from Shripati Uncle. He says, Gayatri says, lovely talk, Divya. Shripati Uncle says, Divya, is demand for the things that the collectives are making an issue? Poor logistics might mean higher prices as well for their products.
Yeah.
Sandeep Uncle says, why are FPOs not successful? Yeah.
Sorry, can you say that last part again? I can't see the chat.
Oh, Sandeep Uncle says, why are FPOs not successful?
Yeah, so the first question was about demand, but I'm not sure if that was all one question, but I will answer it. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, demand is an issue. I think we do see a lot of these smaller cooperatives actually operating in luxury markets because of this, because it's easier to get this kind of worker safety prioritization consensus process working when you're operating in markets that can handle that kind of price markup. But organizations like industry, I think, are doing an incredible job building collectives that are for everyone, right? The things they produce, I mean, they produce like 2 rupee plates, for example, and they are able to work in current markets and meet demand because they have streamlined their processes to the extent that they don't sacrifice on efficiency, they don't sacrifice on production capacity while still working cooperatively. So in that extent, I think demand, like with any organization, we have to understand what people want and make it. And if you can make the things that the people in your community want, that's the best, I think, for a cooperative to do. But of course, swallowing price increases because you want to treat your workers well is something that businesses should be prepared to do as well. So those are, I think, the two sides of demand. On the side of FPOs, I think FPOs can work, but I think it's a long-term process to figure out what that looks like. And I think one of the failure points with FPOs is being in
are farmer producer organizations, just so people who don't know.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
I should have also explained that. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep ji. Yeah, I think one of the failure points with FPOs is being in an in-between space of a lot of these organizational constructs, right? They're not quite a cooperative. They're kind of an organization. They're supported by the government, so they're kind of under the government. They want to produce, so they're a business. But in terms of prioritizing how to make that organization function, I think understanding what the DNA is and how those processes can be optimized for what they're going for, which is not yet clear. And also, I would say I mean, cooperative change is a long-term process. And so FPOs, we haven't had the chance to see a decade out what they look like, if they've evolved to meet those demand needs that we were talking about earlier, if they've evolved to build out organizational processes that are sustainable or not. But I would say it's possibly too early to say the model doesn't work, but certainly a good time to say, why does the model not work and how can we fix it?
Yeah. Divya, can you see the questions? If you can't, I'm happy to read them out.
I think chat. Because I exited
I'll read them out. I'll read them out. We unfortunately only have 3 minutes, but I'll do a very quick job.
Thank you.
Paula G says, how do community leaders collaborate with other communities to multiply impact? And what are the biggest bottlenecks and challenges for sustaining these programs? And she also says, self-help groups, Internet Sathi, Asha workers, Shakti Amma, all these last mile workers are doing various things.
Yeah. what is the bottlenecks and how, what was the first part of that question? Sorry.
And how do community leaders collaborate with
Community
their
leaders,
communities
yes.
to
So
multiply
actually there's
impact?
a great example of this in this village called Amle that we were working in, where they started off building new kinds of electric cook stove, essentially, because the ones they were using were bad for health, bad for the house, bad for kids, all of that. And the community leaders started out not necessarily trusting this organization that came in and said you should use these new kinds of cook stoves. But once the community got on board, and that happened through them actually testing out the process, they adopted the production. They like fully made their own electric cook stoves and started going out into communities to sort of sell these, to say you should be using these too. And I say that to point out that I think community leader collaboration happens when communities are fully on board with the work that they're doing. So we see that when a community thinks that like a cooperative that they're building is exactly the work they want to do, either it's sort of a top-down situation in which they feel that they're being treated well by the cooperative organization, or it's bottom up and that they built it themselves. The proselytization happens instinctively because people are like, we want this, we want other people to have this. That is an idealistic view, of course. There are a lot of physical, logistical reasons why collaboration between communities is hard. And I think this is a good space for these kinds of larger aggregator organizations to come in and say, we want you to have all of the agency, but can provide some of those connections. And we do see aggregator organizations, larger civil society groups do a good job. I mean, that's what Seva did such a great job of, right? Even talking about last mile workers, they're working on that now, but bringing these groups together in a very loose formation to say you all have your own agency, focus on your own communities, but when you need, there's a network out there. And I think that's a very, very good point. And definitely something that we can work on, and a place that digital tools, as we're seeing, can come into play as well.
Before we let you go, Divya, I do want you to answer Mansi's question as well, which says, and you only have a minute for it, but it's such a good question. What internal governance structures work to ensure these community organizations continue to distribute benefits equitably over time, plus take input from the community at large? So the internal governance structures.
That is a very good question. I think there's a mix of decentralized and centralized internal government structures that works. And it massively depends on the scale of the organization. The small organizations we've talked about work well on consensus, but as we see here, ULCCS, the Yurangula Society, they also are able to work on a somewhat consensus-based process. I think they have an incredible government structure. There's a book written about them that I will send to you. But quickly, they do a really good job of, they have like a fully elected board that takes out some decisions, right? That has areas of ownership. But then going down, the board has access to fully bottom-up workers' councils. So it goes from an elected board, which does do some of the decision-making without without consulting the consensus group, because not all decisions can be made by consensus. It's incredibly inefficient and it takes forever. But there are workers groups that come together daily. So after every day of work, they bring together some of the workers, hear what's happening, and there's a structure to bring those concerns up. And still some of the implementations are top down, because not all implementations can be bottom up, but the concerns are brought up from the bottom. So I think they have a really great structure. And yeah, talk to me about this after, for sure.
Thank you so